The kitchen clock read 10 minutes past 9 when my son handed me a canvas bag and told me I had until morning. He said it the way a man tells a stranger the time, without looking up from his phone, without pausing the thought he was already halfway through. The bag was the one I had bought him for college, the green one with the leather straps, and he had filled it himself. I could see the edge of a blue cardigan pushing against the zipper, and the spine of the small photo album I kept on my nightstand, the one with my late husband Harold's picture on the front. That detail, more than anything else, told me Ethan had been in my room. My room. The room that used to be the guest room in this house, the house he had been born in, the house Harold and I bought in 1979 with money we did not have and faith we could not afford. I stood in the kitchen I had designed 36 years ago and I looked at my son, who was 39 years old and still could not make eye contact when he was doing something he knew was wrong. His wife Brianna was at the sink, rinsing a wine glass she did not need to rinse, pretending she was not listening, which meant she was listening to every word. The two of them had rehearsed this. I could smell rehearsal on them the way you can smell rain before it falls. Ethan, I said. Just his name. I had been his mother for 39 years, and I knew the weight his name could carry when I chose to put weight behind it. He looked up finally. His face did that thing it had done since he was a child when he was caught doing something he could not defend, a small tightening around the eyes, a lift of the chin that was supposed to look like confidence but only ever looked like fear wearing a costume. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. I filed that sentence away carefully, the way I had learned to file sentences in the last 6 years since Harold died. I had developed a kind of interior filing cabinet for the things my son and his wife said to me, and I had learned that the sentences that started with "don't make this harder" were almost always the sentences that preceded something quite cruel. Where am I going, Ethan? There's a motel on Route 9. The Pinecrest. I called ahead. They have a room for you. It's paid for a week. A week. He had paid for a week at the Pinecrest Motel, which I happened to know was a place people used when their cars broke down on the interstate and they had nowhere else to go. And he was telling me this as if he had solved a problem, as if the problem of his mother had been a line item on a list and he had finally crossed it off. And after the week? Brianna turned from the sink. She had the kind of face that looked pleasant at first glance and then, the longer you looked at it, revealed the particular hardness that comes from a lifetime of getting one's way. She was 41, and she had married my son 9 years ago in a ceremony she had planned herself, at which she had seated me at the table furthest from the head table, and told the wedding planner that I preferred it that way because large gatherings tired me. I did not prefer it, and large gatherings did not tire me. I had been running large gatherings since before Brianna was born. Margaret, she said, using my first name the way she always did. A small correction she had been making for 9 years, a small refusal to call me anything warmer. We've talked about this. You need a fresh start. You've been here too long. It isn't healthy. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at my son. I looked at the kitchen where I had made 36 years of breakfasts, where I had taught Ethan to crack an egg against the counter with one hand when he was 7, where I had sat at the oak table with Harold on the night we got the news about his diagnosis and we had cried together and then eaten leftover lasagna because life does not stop for grief, it only slows down long enough to humiliate you. Ethan, I said again. Mom. He would not look at me this time. I can't keep doing this. Brianna can't keep doing this. We need the space. We've been patient. 6 years is a long time. 6 years. He was counting. He had been counting. Since the moment Harold died and I had come to live with them in this house, which they had purchased from me for $1 and a handshake after Harold's funeral because, and these were Ethan's exact words at the time, "It makes more sense this way, Mom, for taxes, for estate planning, for your peace of mind." I had signed the papers in the lawyer's office in a fog of grief, and I had moved into the guest room, and I had not fully understood at that time that I had just given my child the only thing I owned that could not be taken back. I had not fully understood, but I had understood enough. Enough that I had kept one thing for myself, one small thing that Ethan and Brianna did not know about, and that thing was now sitting in a locked drawer in a bank in Rochester, 3 hours away, waiting for a phone call I had not yet made. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. I picked up the bag. It was heavier than I expected. I wondered what else my son had thought to pack for me, and what he had left behind without meaning to, and what he had left behind on purpose. "I'll go in the morning," I said. "It's too late to drive tonight." "Mom, the thing is," Ethan started. "She said the morning, Ethan," Brianna cut in. "Let her have the night." And the way Brianna said it, the way she gave me permission to sleep one more night in the house I had built, in the room where my husband's photograph still sat on the dresser, was the precise moment at which I decided fully and finally what I was going to do. I took the bag to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the twin bed that used to be the guest room bed, the one Harold and I had bought for visitors, the one that was too small for a grown woman to sleep on comfortably, and I put the canvas bag on my lap and I unzipped it. He had packed the cardigan. He had packed the photo album. He had packed 3 pairs of underwear, 2 blouses, 1 pair of gray slacks, and the paperback novel from my nightstand, which still had my reading glasses tucked inside it as a bookmark. He had not packed my good coat. He had not packed the jewelry box on my dresser, which contained the pearl earrings Harold had given me on our 30th anniversary, and the wedding ring I had stopped wearing 3 years ago because my knuckles had swollen. He had not packed my address book or my checkbook or the envelope of cash I kept in the bottom drawer of the dresser for emergencies. He had packed for a woman he thought would not need anything again. I sat there on the bed for a long time, and I listened to the sounds of the house. I could hear Brianna downstairs, loading the dishwasher with the careful emphatic clinking of a woman who wanted to be heard. I could hear Ethan in the study on a phone call, his voice low and urgent. I could not hear what he was saying, but I knew the tone. It was the tone he used when he was talking to his lawyer, a man named Preston Calloway, whom I had met twice and had disliked both times. I thought about Harold. I thought about what Harold would have said. Harold had been a small man, physically only 5'6", but he had carried a kind of moral weight that made people sit up straighter in rooms where he was present. He had been a certified public accountant for 41 years, and in that time he had developed what he called a nose for nonsense, which was his way of describing the gift he had for spotting the moment when a man was about to lie to him. I had inherited some of that nose, though mine had always been more patient than his. Harold's nose was the kind that led to confrontation. Mine was the kind that led to waiting. I had been waiting for 6 years. I reached under the mattress. I had hidden something there 3 weeks ago, and I had checked on it every night since, not because I thought anyone would find it, but because touching it gave me a kind of courage I had been rationing. It was an envelope. Inside the envelope was a letter from a man named Thomas Merrick at the New York State Lottery Commission, dated 19 days ago, informing me that the Powerball ticket I had purchased at the gas station on Route 9 on the evening of November 2nd had matched all 6 numbers in the drawing that night, and that the total prize after the lump sum reduction and before taxes was $43,200,000. $43 million. I had walked around with that knowledge inside me for 19 days. I had made breakfast for Ethan and Brianna. I had washed their dishes. I had folded their laundry, including the fine silk blouses Brianna insisted on having hand laundered, which I did without complaint because I had learned that complaint was another form of permission. I had sat at the dinner table and listened to Brianna talk about the renovation she wanted to do on the kitchen I had designed, and I had said nothing. I had gone to bed every night knowing that in a locked drawer at a bank in Rochester, 3 hours north, a cashier's check made out to Margaret Eleanor Whitfield was waiting for me to come and claim it. I had not told anyone. Not Ethan. Not Brianna. Not my best friend Louisa, who lived 4 streets away, and who would have been the first person I told about anything in my life before I moved into this house. I had not told the woman at the bank, beyond what was necessary. I had not even told Harold, though I had gone to the cemetery the Sunday after the drawing and I had stood there in the cold and I had whispered it to his headstone, because some things you cannot keep entirely to yourself. Harold had not answered. He had been dead 6 years. But I had felt him there and I had felt him listening, and I had known in the way you know these things that he approved of what I was doing. What I was doing was waiting. Waiting for my son to show me who he actually was. Waiting for my daughter-in-law to run out of the small patience she had been pretending to have. Waiting for the moment when it would become clear to me, beyond any possible doubt, whether I owed these 2 people anything at all, and if so, what. The moment had come tonight. In the kitchen. With the canvas bag. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope back under the mattress. I stood up. I walked to the dresser and I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 67 years old. My hair was silver, cut short, in the style I had worn for the last decade because I had stopped wanting to fuss with it. My face was lined in the places where a long life puts its signatures. I was wearing the blue house dress Brianna had given me for my 65th birthday, the one she had bought in a size too large because she had wanted to give me the gift of looking matronly. I had worn it that first year and then I had stopped wearing it for a long time, and tonight I had put it on without thinking because my body had been expecting what was coming and had dressed me for it. I took off the house dress. I hung it in the closet. I opened the drawer where I kept my real clothes, the ones I had bought for myself with my own careful savings from the small pension I received from Harold's accounting firm. I chose a cream-colored silk blouse, a pair of gray wool trousers that fit me the way clothes fit you when you have chosen them for your own body, a wool blazer navy cut well, pearl earrings, the good coat from the back of the closet, the one Ethan had not thought to pack. I looked at myself again in the mirror. I looked like a woman a stranger might stop on the street to ask for directions, which is to say I looked like myself, the self I had been before Harold died, the self I had quietly been re-becoming for 19 days now in secret. I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and I took out the notepad I kept in the drawer. I wrote 3 phone numbers on 3 separate pages. The first number was Thomas Merrick's direct line at the Lottery Commission. The second number was the direct line of a woman named Celeste Vaughn at the Rochester branch of my bank, who had handled the matter of the cashier's check. The third number was the number of a lawyer named David Oren in Albany, a lawyer Harold had used for his accounting firm for 27 years, a lawyer who had called me 3 weeks ago when my name appeared in a database he subscribed to, a lawyer who had said to me on the phone, gently and without preamble, "Margaret, I believe you may need some counsel, and may I please have the honor of providing it?" I had not yet called David Oren back. I had told him I needed to think. He had said, "Of course, Margaret, take all the time you need." And I knew now, sitting in this room on the night my son had told me to leave, that the time was up. I put the 3 phone numbers in the pocket of the navy blazer. I put my checkbook in my address book, and the envelope of cash from the bottom drawer into my good purse. I took the jewelry box off the dresser and I opened it and I took out the pearl earrings which I was already wearing, and I took out Harold's wedding ring which I had kept after he died, and I put it on a chain and I put the chain around my neck. I left the wedding ring I had stopped wearing in the box. Brianna could have it if she wanted it. I wondered briefly whether she would try to pawn it. I wondered whether she would succeed. I put the photo album on top of the clothes Ethan had packed in the canvas bag. I added the things he had forgotten: my coat, my glasses, my address book, my checkbook, the envelope of cash, my good shoes, the small leather case that held my passport, my birth certificate, my marriage license, Harold's death certificate, and the original deed to the house that Ethan and Brianna now lived in. The deed that had been transferred to my son in 2020 for $1 and a handshake, the deed that I had photocopied before signing because Harold had taught me long ago that you photocopy everything. Photocopy everything. It was one of the few pieces of practical advice Harold had ever given me that I had followed without argument. He had said it to me the first time we bought a car together in 1973, and I had laughed and said it seemed excessive, and he had said, "Margaret, the only time photocopying everything is excessive is the time you do not need it. And every other time it is the thing that saves you." Harold had been right. I closed the canvas bag, closed my purse. I sat down on the edge of the twin bed again and I put my hands in my lap and I looked at the door and I listened to my son talking to his lawyer downstairs, and I waited for the house to quiet down because I was going to do this tonight, not in the morning, and I was going to do it without saying goodbye. They thought they had until morning. They thought I was going to cry myself to sleep in this room one last time, and in the morning I was going to come down and stand in the kitchen and beg them to let me stay, and when they said no I was going to leave slowly and sadly with my canvas bag, and I was going to get in a taxi they would have to call for me because I had not driven in 6 years, and I was going to the Pinecrest Motel on Route 9, and I was going to sit in a room that smelled like cigarettes and disinfectant, and I was going to wonder how my life had come to this. That was the story they had written for me. I was going to write a different one. At 10:45, Brianna went up to bed. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heavy and confident, the footsteps of a woman who had won. At 11:15, Ethan finished his call and went up to bed. I heard the bedroom door close. I heard the muffled sound of their voices for a few minutes, and then I heard nothing, and I knew that in another 20 minutes they would both be asleep, because Ethan had always been a deep sleeper and Brianna took a sleeping pill every night at 11. At 11:45 I stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up the canvas bag and my purse. I took one last look around the room. I looked at Harold's photograph on the dresser and I picked it up, and I put it carefully into the bag on top of the photo album, because I was not leaving it behind in a house that no longer deserved it. I looked at the twin bed. I looked at the small window that faced the backyard. I did not feel sad. I had expected to feel sad and I did not, and I noted that, and I filed it away with the other things I had been filing away for 6 years. I opened the bedroom door. I walked down the hallway. I walked down the stairs. I walked through the kitchen where my son had handed me a canvas bag 3 hours earlier. I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the doorknob and I paused and I turned around and I looked at the kitchen one last time. Then I opened the door and I stepped out into the cold November night, and I closed the door quietly behind me, and I walked down the driveway to the sidewalk and I walked 4 streets over to the house of my best friend Louisa, which was where I had decided, standing in the mirror an hour earlier, I was going to go first. Louisa had been my friend for 41 years. She was 68. She had been widowed for 9 years. She lived alone in a small brick house with a garden she tended obsessively, and a tabby cat named Rodney who hated everyone except her. Louisa had known Harold and she had loved him, and she had cried at his funeral harder than anyone except me. Louisa and I had not seen each other as often as we used to since I had moved in with Ethan and Brianna, because Brianna did not like Louisa, and Louisa did not like Brianna, and it had been easier to let the friendship thin out than to fight for it every week. That was one of the things I had been filing away. That was one of the things I was now going to unfile. Louisa's porch light was on. I rang the doorbell at 5 past midnight, and I stood on her porch in my good coat with my canvas bag at my feet, and I waited. I heard her footsteps come down the hallway. I heard her unlatch the chain. I heard her open the door. She looked at me. She took in the coat, the bag, the hour. Her face did a thing I had forgotten faces could do, a thing I had not seen in 6 years, which was the thing a face does when it sees you and is glad to see you and is entirely on your side without needing to be asked. "Oh, Margaret," she said. And then, because Louisa had known me for 41 years, she said nothing else. She just opened the door wider, and she stepped aside and she let me come in. I sat at her kitchen table. I drank the tea she made me. I let her put my coat on the hook by the door, and my canvas bag beside the couch in the living room. I did not cry, which surprised her more than anything I could have said. Louisa had been expecting tears because anyone would have been expecting tears, and there were no tears, and she looked at me across the kitchen table and she said slowly, "Margaret, what happened?" And I told her. I told her about the canvas bag and the Pinecrest Motel and the 6 years and the 36 years before that. I told her about the deed I had signed in 2020 and the photocopy I had kept. I told her about Brianna using my first name. I told her about the wedding where I had been seated at the far table, and the Christmas last year when Ethan had not bought me a present because, as Brianna had explained, they were on a budget. I told her about the way my son had stopped looking at me in 2021, and the way my daughter-in-law had started correcting me in front of the grocery store cashier, and the way both of them had begun, slowly, imperceptibly, with the patience of people who had read the same book on the subject, to refer to me as if I were not in the room. Louisa listened. She did not interrupt. She poured me more tea when my cup was empty, and she got up once to let Rodney out, and she sat back down and she listened. And when I was finished, I took a breath. And I said, "Louisa, there is one more thing. Tell me. 19 days ago, I bought a Powerball ticket at the Shell station on Route 9. She looked at me. Her face did not change. I won, Louisa. Her face still did not change. Louisa had a very good face for receiving news. How much? $43,200,000. Louisa set her teacup down very carefully. She looked at me for a long moment. And then, because Louisa had known me for 41 years and had been waiting 41 years to say the right thing at the right moment, she said, "Margaret, what are we going to do about your son?" "We." She said we. And I sat there in my best friend's kitchen at 12:40 in the morning on a Thursday in November, and for the first time in 6 years I was not alone. Louisa made up the guest room for me that night with sheets that smelled like lavender because Louisa had always been the kind of woman who kept sachets in her linen closet, which was one of the many small dignities I had lost in the last 6 years. I had forgotten what it felt like to sleep on sheets that someone had prepared for me with the expectation that I mattered. I slept for 7 hours without waking, which had not happened since Harold died. And when I opened my eyes, the light coming through Louisa's guest room curtains was the pale gold color of a November morning that did not yet know what the day was going to hold. Louisa was in the kitchen. She had made coffee in the glass carafe pot, the kind I used to own before Brianna had exiled it to the garage in favor of a pod machine. The smell of real coffee in a real kitchen, with a friend in it who knew my whole life, was such a small thing and such an enormous thing at the same time that I had to stand in the doorway for a moment and let myself register it before I walked in. "I didn't know if you wanted eggs," Louisa said. "I would love eggs. Scrambled. Any way you're making them." She cracked 4 eggs into a bowl, and she did it with one hand the way I had taught Ethan to do it when he was 7, and I watched her, and I thought about all the things a life holds and loses and finds again if you are lucky and patient and stubborn enough. We ate the eggs. We drank the coffee. We did not talk about the canvas bag or the motel or the $43 million until our plates were clean, and then Louisa got up and refilled both our cups and sat back down and she said, "Margaret, I was awake most of the night." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I was thinking. I think you need to call the lawyer. David Oren. David Oren. This morning. Before they know you're gone. Before Brianna goes into your room and sees the empty hangers." I had thought the same thing, somewhere between 3 and 5 in the morning when I had woken for a moment and then gone back to sleep. There was a window. There was a small window of time, maybe 6 hours, maybe less, during which Ethan and Brianna did not yet know that the story they had been writing for me was no longer the story I was in. And during that window I needed to make 3 phone calls and I needed to make them in the right order. I took the 3 slips of paper out of my purse. I put them on Louisa's kitchen table. I looked at them. I picked up David Oren's number first. David Oren answered on the second ring. His voice was the voice of a man who had been expecting me to call for 3 weeks, and had decided not to be surprised when I finally did. "Margaret," he said. "Good morning. David. I'd like to engage you." "I'm glad to hear that. Where are you calling from?" "A friend's kitchen. In Millbrook. I left my son's house last night." There was a pause on the other end of the line, not a long one, the kind of pause a good lawyer makes when he is deciding which of 3 questions to ask first. "Margaret, is there anyone in the room with you right now besides your friend?" "No." "Can you put me on speakerphone so your friend can hear this conversation? And can your friend get a piece of paper and a pen?" Louisa was already getting up for the pen. I put the phone on the table between us. David Oren asked me a series of questions, each one short and clean, and I answered each one, and Louisa took notes in her careful round handwriting. He asked about the deed, and I told him about the photocopy. He asked about the lottery ticket, and I told him it was in the locked drawer at the Rochester bank along with the letter from Thomas Merrick and the signed claim form I had filled out 9 days ago and left there for safekeeping. He asked about Ethan and Brianna, and he asked about the events of last night in more detail than I had expected. And when I told him about the canvas bag in the motel, I heard him exhale softly, the way a man exhales when he is filing information away for later use. "Margaret, here is what I would like to do today. With your permission." "Go ahead. First, I would like you to call Celeste Vaughn at your bank this morning, and I would like you to authorize her to speak to me directly about the check. I will then travel to Rochester this afternoon to meet with her in person. By close of business today, I would like the check deposited into a new account that I will set up for you at a different institution, under a trust structure we will finalize in the coming week. Your son and his wife will have no visibility into this account. No one will, except you and me and the trustee we select. All right. Second, I would like to send an associate to the house in Millbrook this morning to deliver a letter. The letter will inform your son that you have retained counsel, that you are no longer residing at the property, and that any further communication regarding your personal effects, your financial affairs, or any other matter should be directed to my office. The letter will make no mention of the lottery. Your son does not need to know about the lottery yet. He does not need to know about it for some time. All right. Third, Margaret. And this is the part one want you to think about carefully before you answer. The deed. Louisa looked up from her notes. Go on, I said. You transferred the house to your son in 2020 for $1. You have a photocopy of the original deed, and you have a photocopy of the transfer documents. I would like to review those documents this afternoon. Depending on what I find, there may be grounds to challenge the transfer. Undue influence. Elder financial exploitation. There are several possible approaches, and I won't know which is appropriate until I see the paperwork. But Margaret, I want you to understand something. If I find what I think I may find, you may have the option to recover that property. It will not be easy. It will not be quick. It may take a year or longer. But it is possible. And I want you to tell me now whether you wish to pursue it. I looked at Louisa. Louisa looked at me. Rodney the cat had come into the kitchen and was winding around my ankles, which was the closest Rodney had ever come to expressing an opinion on anything. David, I said, I will tell you the truth. I do not know if I want that house back. I built it. I raised my son in it. It was Harold's house. But I am not sure I want to live in a place that has that much of Ethan's fingerprints on it now. I need to think about that one. That is a very good answer. Think about it. You have time. In the meantime, with your permission, I will request the documents so that the option is preserved. Yes. Request the documents. Good. One more thing, Margaret. Yes. Your son will not take the letter well. He will try to call you. He will try to come find you. He may contact your friend. He may involve other family members. I need you to not answer the phone when he calls, and I need you to not speak to him directly under any circumstances until we have spoken again. Anything he wants to say to you, he can say to me. Is that clear? That is clear. Margaret, I am very sorry this is happening to you. And I am very glad you called. Thank you, David. I hung up. I looked at Louisa. Louisa looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment, because there was nothing yet that needed to be said. Then Louisa stood up and went to the counter and came back with the pot and refilled our coffee, and she said, Who's next? Celeste Vaughn. At the bank. The call to Celeste Vaughn took 7 minutes. She was a woman of about my age, very professional, very precise, and she had understood from the first conversation we had 19 days ago that this was a situation that required discretion. When I told her that David Oren would be contacting her, and that I was authorizing her to speak with him, she did not ask any questions at all. She simply said, Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. I'll be expecting his call. And that was that. The third call I did not make that morning. The third call was to Thomas Merrick at the Lottery Commission, and it could wait. Thomas Merrick had already been paid his piece of the story. He had issued the check. He had done his part. I had time before I needed to call him back. What I did next, while Louisa washed the breakfast dishes, was sit at her kitchen table and open the leather case I had packed in the canvas bag last night. The one with my birth certificate and my marriage license and Harold's death certificate and the photocopied deed. I spread the documents out on the table in front of me. I looked at them. I looked at the dates. I looked at my own signature on the 2020 transfer document, and I looked at the small shakiness in the letters, which I remembered now, which I had not noticed at the time, which was the shakiness of a woman in grief being asked to sign something she had not fully read by a son she had trusted. I looked at that signature for a long time, and I filed it away. At 10:15 that morning, Louisa's doorbell rang. We both froze. I had been expecting it to be David Oren's associate, but it was too early for that. Louisa looked at me. I nodded. She went to the door. It was not David Oren's associate. It was my granddaughter. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Her name was Sophie, and she was 12 years old, and she was Ethan and Brianna's daughter, and she was the only person in that house who had been consistently kind to me for 6 years. She was standing on Louisa's porch in her school uniform, a plaid skirt and a white blouse and a navy cardigan, with her backpack on her shoulders at 10:15 in the morning on a Thursday, which meant she had walked out of the school and come directly to Louisa's house, which meant she had known where to find me, which meant she had been paying attention. Grandma, she said. I got up from the table so fast that Rodney hissed. I went to the door. I put my arms around her, and she put her arms around me, and for the first time since the canvas bag had been put into my hands the night before, I cried. I cried into Sophie's hair. which smelled like the strawberry shampoo she had been using since she was 9, and she cried into my shoulder, and Louisa stepped back quietly into the kitchen to give us the hallway to ourselves. "Grandma, they said you were gone. They said you left." "I did leave, sweetheart. Mom said you got confused. She said you packed up and you walked out in the middle of the night and we don't know where you are." I held her at arm's length. I looked at her. She had her father's face and her mother's eyes, and she had something that was entirely her own, which was a clear small-chinned determination that made her look, at 12, like a woman who was going to refuse to be lied to for the rest of her life. "Sophie." I did not get confused. "I left because your father asked me to leave." Her mouth tightened. "I heard them last night. I was supposed to be asleep. I heard them in the hallway." "What did you hear?" "Dad said she'll be gone in the morning, we just have to get through tonight." And Mom said finally. She said finally, Grandma. My granddaughter, 12 years old, had been lying in her bed at 10 o'clock last night, listening through her bedroom door, hearing her mother say finally about the departure of her grandmother. And she had known. And she had waited. And this morning she had walked out of school and come to Louisa's house, because Sophie was the kind of child who noticed things, and Sophie had known where I would go, because 6 years ago when I first moved in with her parents, Sophie had come with me on my Sunday visits to Louisa's, and she had remembered. "Sophie, sit down. Come in. Let me make you some tea. I should be at school." "I know. But I wanted to see you first." "I know, sweetheart. Come in." I brought her into the kitchen. Louisa, who had raised 3 daughters of her own, had already put the kettle on. She did not speak to Sophie in the voice adults use to talk to children who are upset. She spoke to her in the voice she used to speak to me, which was the voice of one full person speaking to another full person, and Sophie responded to it the way children always respond to it, which is with a visible straightening of the spine. "Hello, Sophie. Do you take milk?" "Yes, please." "Sugar?" "1. You walked all the way from school. It's only 7 blocks. "Sophie, I'm glad to see you. I have known your grandmother for a very long time." "I know. She's talked about you." "Has she?" "She said you were the only person besides Grandpa who ever really got her jokes." Louisa laughed, which was a rare sound in Louisa's kitchen, and she set the teacup down in front of my granddaughter with the respect of a woman who had just been complimented by someone whose opinion mattered. Sophie drank her tea. She looked at me. And then, because she was 12 and she had been carrying something for longer than 12 was meant to carry things, she said, "Grandma, can I tell you something I was supposed to not tell you?" "You can tell me anything. Dad and Mom have been talking about your money." Louisa and I looked at each other. I sat down slowly. "What money, Sophie?" "I don't know. Money you have. They thought you didn't have any money and then something happened and they thought maybe you did and they've been talking about it for a couple of weeks. Mom said, if she has money, Ethan, we need to handle this before she figures out she can use it. And Dad said she won't figure anything out. She doesn't even know how to work the new TV. And Mom said that's exactly why we need to move now." My granddaughter paused. She drank her tea. She looked at me with the kind of direct gaze 12-year-olds can summon when they have decided that a situation requires them to be older than they are. "Grandma, do you have money?" I looked at Louisa. Louisa looked at me. I looked back at Sophie. I thought about what to say. I thought about whether a 12-year-old could carry this information. I thought about whether a 12-year-old should have to. And then I thought about who Sophie was, which was the only person in that house who had noticed that her grandmother was a human being. And I thought about the fact that she had walked 7 blocks out of school this morning to find me, and I decided that she had already earned the right to know what she was asking about. "Sophie, I am going to tell you something, and I am going to ask you to keep it between us for a little while. Not forever, but for a few weeks. Can you do that?" "Yes. 19 days ago, I bought a lottery ticket, and I won." Her eyes went wide. "How much?" $43 million. She did not speak for a long moment. She put her teacup down very carefully, which was the same gesture Louisa had made last night, which was apparently the universal gesture adults and children both used when they had just received news that rearranged the furniture of their understanding. And then she said in a small clear voice, "That's why they asked you to leave. They don't know about the money, Sophie. Your parents do not know I won. Then why did they ask you to leave?" I think, sweetheart, they had been planning to ask me to leave for a long time. I think whatever they had been noticing about my finances was something else. I don't know what yet. But the timing is not about the lottery. The lottery is something only I know about. And me. And you. And her. Sophie looked at Louisa. And Louisa. And your lawyer. And my lawyer. Okay. Sophie nodded, as if she were confirming a list in her head. Okay. I can keep that secret. I'm really good at keeping secrets. You know I've been keeping a secret for a long time already. What secret, Sophie? She looked at me. She hesitated. And then she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and she pulled out her phone, and she did something on the screen, and she turned the phone toward me. It was a photograph of a document. The document was on Ethan's desk in the study. I could see the edge of the desk and the small wooden box where Ethan kept his letter opener. The document was a letter from Preston Calloway, Ethan's lawyer, and it was dated 3 weeks ago. The subject line was petition for guardianship, draft for review. I read the letter. I read it twice. The letter outlined a plan to petition the court for guardianship of me, Margaret Eleanor Whitfield, on the grounds of diminished capacity. It referenced as evidence several incidents in which I had allegedly become confused. It included a schedule of medications I had supposedly forgotten to take. It referenced conversations with my primary care doctor that I had never had with him, because I had not seen my primary care doctor in 2 years because Brianna had told me the office was no longer taking new patients, which I now understood to have been a lie. The letter closed by recommending that the petition be filed within 60 days. I read the date again. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago was 2 days before I bought the lottery ticket. This had been in motion before the lottery. The lottery had nothing to do with it. The lottery was coincidence, or it was grace, or it was Harold reaching down from wherever Harold now was and putting a small piece of paper into my hand at exactly the moment I was going to need it. Sophie, when did you take this picture? Last week. Dad left the study door open. He was in the kitchen. I went in to ask him about homework and I saw it on the desk. I took a picture. Grandma, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know who to tell. I thought about telling you, but Mom is always in the room when you and I talk. I was going to tell you tonight when we watch TV together. But then last night happened. Sophie, look at me. You did the right thing. I know. You did exactly the right thing. You are the most remarkable person in this story, and you need to know that. Grandma, I knew what they were doing was wrong. Yes, you did. And I knew I needed to keep it because I thought maybe you would need it. I need it, Sophie. I need it very much. Can I have that picture? Yes. I'll send it to you. Actually, I already sent it to myself at school so Mom couldn't find it on my phone. I'm going to send it to you now. What's your phone number? The real one. Not the house phone. I did not have my phone with me. My phone was in the drawer of the side table in the upstairs hallway of Ethan's house, where I had left it last night, because I had known Ethan had some way of tracking it. David Oren had told me this morning to pick up a prepaid phone at the pharmacy today. I gave Sophie Louisa's landline number and Louisa's email address, and she sent the picture to Louisa's email, and I watched the small progress bar on my granddaughter's phone, and when it finished I sat back in my chair and I looked at Louisa and Louisa looked at me, and something had shifted in the room that neither of us had to name. Sophie, you need to go back to school now. You need to go back and you need to act like nothing happened. Can you do that? Yes. Your parents are going to be very upset when they learn I've left, and they are going to ask you if I've contacted you. You need to tell them no. I can do that. I don't like asking you to lie to your parents, Sophie. Grandma, they've been lying to me for 6 years. I think I've earned one. Louisa looked at me and her mouth did a small thing that was almost a laugh. Sophie stood up. She put her backpack on. She hugged me again hard and she said into my shoulder, Grandma, don't go back there. Don't let them talk you into coming back. I won't, sweetheart. Promise. I promise. She left. We watched her through the front window until she was around the corner and out of sight, and then Louisa turned to me and she said, Margaret, I am going to say something and you are not going to like it. Say it. That child cannot stay in that house. I know, Louisa. That child needs to come here. Or she needs to come with you wherever you end up. She is 12, and she is the most honest person in this story, and those two people are going to notice that she's been paying attention, and they are going to start being careful around her in ways that are going to hurt her. I know. What are you going to do about it? I am going to call David Oren again. David Oren, when I called him back at 11:40 with the phone on speaker and Louisa sitting across from me, listened to the description of the guardianship letter without interrupting, and when I was finished he was silent for a full 10 seconds, which was the longest silence I had yet heard from him, and then he said, "Margaret, I want you to forward me that photograph immediately. I want you to stay at your friend's house today. Do not answer the door unless it is me or my associate. My associate will be there at noon with the letter for your son. I want to move our timeline up. The D challenge, the medical records request, all of it. We are starting today, not next week. And Margaret. Yes. Your granddaughter. You need to tell me everything you know about her situation in that house. Right now. I am taking notes." I told him. About Sophie. About the 6 years of watching her grow up inside a house where her parents were slowly becoming people I did not recognize. About the photograph. About the way she had spoken this morning, with the small straight spine of a child who had been adult in an emergency for longer than was fair. David Oren said, "Margaret, there may be an avenue here. I do not want to promise anything yet. But a child who has evidence of planned elder abuse in her own home, who is being raised by the perpetrators, is not a child the court is going to ignore if the matter is raised correctly. And if you are prepared to be that child's advocate, and if, as I suspect, the guardianship petition was intended to give your son and his wife legal control over not only your person but your assets, and was timed to occur before a certain event they were anticipating." "What event, David?" "Margaret. Your son's wife is a beneficiary on a life insurance policy." "What?" "I pulled a preliminary report this morning after we spoke. Brianna Whitfield is listed as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy taken out on you, Margaret, in 2021, approximately 1 year after the house transfer. The policy value is $2 million. The policy was taken out by Ethan Whitfield as the primary policyholder, with Brianna listed as a co-beneficiary. You, Margaret, are the insured. I assume you were not aware of this." I was very quiet. Louisa reached across the table and took my hand. "No, David. I was not aware of this." "I thought not. Margaret, I need you to listen to me. I am going to say this very carefully. There is nothing illegal about taking out a life insurance policy on a family member with their knowledge and consent. There is something potentially very illegal about taking out such a policy without their knowledge, and there is something catastrophically illegal about doing so in combination with a guardianship petition designed to isolate and control the insured person, particularly if that person has assets that the policyholders wish to access. I am not accusing anyone of anything yet. I am stating the facts of what I have found in the last 3 hours. I want you to understand what those facts imply, and I want you to understand that my recommendation, Margaret, is that you do not go back to that house under any circumstances ever, and that you do not meet with your son alone ever until this matter is resolved." Louisa's hand tightened on mine. "David," I said. "Yes. Thank you. Margaret, I have been a lawyer for 39 years. And I will tell you something I should perhaps not tell you, which is that this is the kind of case that lawyers of my age take because we are angry. I loved Harold. I am going to handle this case personally. Every step. You will not be handed off to an associate." "Thank you, David. I will be at Louisa's at 2 this afternoon. I am canceling my other appointments. We have work to do." He hung up. I sat at the table with Louisa's hand still in mine, and I looked at the documents spread in front of me, and I thought about my son. I thought about the boy who had cracked eggs at my counter at 7. I thought about the teenager who had cried on my shoulder the night his father died. I thought about the young man who had graduated from college and kissed me on the cheek and said, "Mom, I couldn't have done any of this without you." I thought about the adult who had signed a piece of paper in 2021 taking out a life insurance policy on his mother, and who had sat across a breakfast table from me for 4 years afterward, and who had handed me a canvas bag last night and told me to leave his house by morning. I was not going to cry. I had done my crying at Sophie. I was past crying now. I was into the other thing, the quiet thing. The thing Harold had taught me was the only thing worth arriving at after a long enough wait. I was into the part where I was going to act. "Louisa." "Yes. I need to go to the pharmacy." "I'll drive you." And then I need to call David back and tell him 2 things. What things? That I want the deed back. The house. I want it back. Not because I want to live in it, but because it is mine and it was built by Harold, and I do not want Brianna Whitfield to inherit so much as the kitchen cabinets. And the second thing. I want Sophie. Louisa looked at me. She did not say anything for a long moment. And then she said, Margaret, I have been waiting for you to say that. I am 67 years old, Louisa. I am going to be a single guardian to a 12-year-old. You are going to be a single guardian to a 12-year-old with $43 million and a lawyer who loved your husband and a best friend 4 streets from the school. When you put it that way, Margaret, that girl needs you, and you need her. And the story that your son was writing for you has a different ending than he thought it did. And the ending is that the woman he threw out of his house in the middle of the night with a canvas bag is going to walk back into a courtroom 6 months from now with a lawyer and a niece and a deed and a photograph, and she is going to take from him everything he tried to take from her, and she is going to do it legally, and she is going to do it quietly, and she is going to do it the way Harold would have wanted. I looked at my best friend of 41 years. I looked at the kitchen in her small brick house where I had sat on Sunday afternoons for so many years before my life had narrowed into Ethan's guest room. I looked at the documents on the table. Louisa. Yes. Let's go to the pharmacy. At 12:15, while Louisa and I were walking out of the pharmacy with a prepaid phone and a bag of incidentals, David Oren's associate, a young woman named Petra Shaw in a gray suit, was knocking on Ethan and Brianna's front door with a letter in her hand. Brianna answered. Petra Shaw introduced herself. She handed Brianna the letter. She said, Please inform your husband that all further communication regarding Mrs. Whitfield is to be directed to this office. Good afternoon. And she walked back to her car and drove away, and Brianna stood on the porch in her matching athletic wear with a letter in her hand that she did not yet understand but that she would understand in approximately 4 minutes, which was how long it was going to take her to read it twice. 4 minutes later, Ethan's phone, which had been on the kitchen counter because he had not yet gotten around to charging it that morning, began to ring. It was his lawyer, Preston Calloway. Preston Calloway had just received a courtesy copy of the letter David Oren had sent, because that was how lawyers of David Oren's generation operated, and Preston Calloway was calling to inform Ethan Whitfield that he had a problem. Ethan did not answer the phone. Ethan was at work. Ethan's work was at a mid-sized insurance firm in a neighboring town, and he had arrived at the office that morning pleased with himself, because the canvas bag plan had gone smoothly, and his mother had gone to her room, and the house had been quiet when he left, and he had assumed his mother was upstairs packing her things and preparing to leave in the morning as instructed. He had not yet been back into her room. He had not yet discovered that her closet was empty, or that the photograph of his father was gone from the dresser, or that the jewelry box on the dresser had been left open with one ring in it and the rest of the contents missing. Brianna, standing on the porch with Petra Shaw's letter, had not yet been up to the room either. Brianna had been on her way to her morning yoga class when the doorbell rang, and she was still in yoga clothes, and she was about to go upstairs to change, and she was about to discover in the next 45 seconds that the woman she had called Margaret for 9 years had left the house in the middle of the night, had retained counsel by 11 in the morning, and had sent a lawyer to her front door at noon. Brianna was about to have a very long afternoon. And my long afternoon was about to begin too, but mine was going to be different. Mine was going to be spent with Louisa and David Oren and a legal pad, at a kitchen table that smelled like coffee, in a house where the sheets had lavender sachets in them, with a granddaughter who was going to come to me after school, with my husband's photograph back in my possession, with a secret check at a bank in Rochester, with a photograph on a phone that was going to change the life of my son, with a best friend who had been waiting 41 years to say we, and with the quiet, certain earned knowledge that I was not going to a motel on Route 9, I was not going anywhere anyone had planned for me to go, I was going exactly where I was going to decide I was going, and I was taking my granddaughter with me, and the woman my son and his daughter-in-law had mistaken for a piece of furniture in their kitchen was about to become the woman who rearranged the entire house. David Oren arrived at Louisa's front door at 1:57 in the afternoon. He was a tall man, 72 years old, with white hair cut short and a brown leather briefcase that had clearly been with him for most of his career. He took off his hat in Louisa's foyer the way men of his generation still did, And he shook Louisa's hand with both of his and he said, "Louisa, I remember you from Harold's funeral. You were a great comfort to Margaret that day." And Louisa, who did not often get caught off guard, was caught off guard. And she put her hand on his forearm and she said, "David, thank you for coming." We sat at the kitchen table. David took documents out of his briefcase. He had been busy. In the 4 hours since our first phone call, he had pulled the deed records. He had confirmed the life insurance policy with a contact at the issuing company. He had requested my medical records from the primary care practice where I was still technically a patient despite Brianna's assurances to the contrary, and he had drafted 3 separate filings that he was prepared to submit to the court first thing Monday morning. He walked me through all of it. He did not rush. He used a pen to underline things he wanted me to notice. He asked me questions and he wrote down my answers, and when I did not know the answer to something, he nodded and moved on and came back to it later with a slightly different phrasing, the way a good lawyer circles a fact from several angles until the fact gives up its shape. At 3:15, he looked at me over his reading glasses and he said, "Margaret, I want to talk to you about the granddaughter. Sophie. Sophie, here is what I can tell you. The photograph she took is not, by itself, a silver bullet. It is evidence of intent. It is not evidence of a completed crime. The life insurance policy is not, by itself, illegal. The guardianship petition which was never filed is not, by itself, illegal. The deed transfer 6 years ago is probably not reversible on its own merits without additional supporting evidence of undue influence. Do you understand what I am saying? You are saying that each piece on its own is not enough. I am saying that each piece on its own is not enough. But together, Margaret, together they tell a story that a judge is going to find very persuasive. Pattern of behavior. A plan. A family, an elderly mother. A slow tightening of control. A house transferred. Policy taken out without consent. A petition drafted. An eviction in the middle of November with a canvas bag. Each piece on its own is a small thing. Together, it is a story about elder financial exploitation, and it is a story I can win. How long will it take? 9 months. Possibly a year. And Sophie. Sophie is the harder piece, Margaret. I will not lie to you. Removing a child from her parents' home, even into the care of a competent, loving grandmother who has abundant resources, is not something the court does easily or quickly. However, he tapped the photograph Sophie had taken, which he had printed from the email Louisa had forwarded him and placed on the table between us. A child who independently provides evidence of her parents' plan to defraud her grandmother, who expresses a clear preference to live with that grandmother, who has a stable alternative placement waiting for her, who is 12 years old and articulate and credible. Margaret, a judge is going to listen. I cannot promise you the outcome. I can promise you that we have a real case. And I can promise you that I know 2 family court judges in this district who are going to read that guardianship letter and be very, very angry on your granddaughter's behalf. What do we do first? First, we get Sophie out of that house voluntarily. We ask Ethan and Brianna to let her stay with her grandmother during the pendency of the legal proceedings. They will refuse. When they refuse, we file for emergency temporary custody. We submit the photograph. We submit the insurance policy. We submit the guardianship draft. We submit the letter I sent this morning and their response to it. And Margaret, we submit one more thing. What? A statement from you. A statement describing, in your own words, the 6 years you spent in that house. The small things. The meals served to you after everyone else ate. The medical appointments Brianna told you were canceled. The Christmas presents your son did not buy you. The way Brianna used your first name. The way they spoke about you at the dinner table as if you were not in the room. Margaret, judges read a lot of statements. Most of them are about big things. The big things are easier to dismiss than to prove. But the small things, the small patient-specific things, the way a daughter-in-law talks to a mother-in-law for 6 years at a kitchen sink, those are the things that make a judge look up from the paper and understand that they are not reading a legal document, they are reading a life. I looked at him. I looked at Louisa. I looked at the kitchen window, where the November afternoon light was starting to go soft and gold the way it does before it goes gray. I can write that statement, David. I know you can. When do you need it? Sunday evening. I file Monday morning. You will have it Sunday morning. David Oren smiled. The first smile I had seen on his face all afternoon. Harold was right about you, Margaret. What did Harold say? Harold said his wife is the strongest person he had ever met, and that no one in her life including him had ever fully understood how strong because she had never needed to show it. He told me that at a firm dinner in 1998. I never forgot it. I did not cry. I had decided sometime around noon that I was not going to cry again today, and I kept my decision. But something in my chest moved, and it moved in the direction of the seat at the head of the table where Harold had sat for 41 years. And I said quietly, to a man who had been dead for 6 years and to a lawyer who was sitting across from me in my best friend's kitchen, "Thank you, Harold. I heard you." David Oren left at 4:40. He took with him the photocopy of the deed, the birth certificate, the marriage license, the death certificate, and a signed retainer agreement that Louisa had witnessed. He left behind a list of things I needed to do before Sunday. The first thing on the list was write the statement. The second thing was not answer the phone. The third thing was a note he had added in his own hand at the bottom, which read, "Margaret, rest. You have done more in one day than most people do in a month. Rest tonight. The work begins again tomorrow." Sophie arrived at 4:55 at the end of her school day, with her backpack on and a careful expression that told me she had been thinking very hard for several hours. I made her a sandwich. She ate it at the kitchen table while Louisa and I drank coffee, and pretended not to watch her too closely. "Grandma." "Yes." "Mom came to the school." Louisa and I both looked up. "When?" "Around 3. She came to the office and she asked if I had seen you. She said she was worried about you. She said Grandma had wandered off and that I should tell her right away if I heard from you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I hadn't heard from you and that I was worried too. And then I told her I had a lot of homework and I needed to get back to class." "Sophie." "I lied, Grandma. I lied really well. I don't think she knew." "Sophie, I need to ask you something and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to keep living in your parents' house?" She did not think as long as I expected her to think. She had already thought about it. She had thought about it on the walk back to school this morning, and through her 4th period English class, and at lunch, and during the walk from school to Louisa's house that afternoon. She had been thinking about it for longer than today, I realized looking at her face. She had been thinking about it for a long time. "No, Grandma. Where do you want to live?" "With you. Wherever you live. I don't care where. I just want to live with you." "Sophie, if I ask your parents if you can come live with me, they are going to say no. They are going to say no very loudly. And then we are going to have to ask a judge to let you come live with me, and a judge is going to listen to what you have to say, and you are going to have to tell the truth about your parents in a courtroom with your parents in the room. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes." "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Sophie, you can take some time to think about this." "Grandma, I have been thinking about this for 2 years. I want to live with you. I will tell the judge whatever the judge needs to know. I have the photograph. I have other things. I have been keeping things, Grandma, for a long time." Louisa and I looked at each other. "What other things, Sophie?" She reached into her backpack. She took out a small notebook, a purple one with a unicorn on the cover, which was the kind of notebook 12-year-old girls kept, and which was therefore the kind of notebook adults did not look twice at, which was presumably why Sophie had chosen it. She opened it to a page near the back. The page had dates written on it in her round, careful handwriting. Under each date was a short note. "What is this, Sophie?" "It's what they said about you. Things Mom and Dad said about you when they thought I couldn't hear. I started writing it down when I was 10. I didn't know why at first. I just felt like someone should write it down. I looked at the notebook. I read the dates. I read the entries. There were 38 of them. The earliest was dated 2.5 years ago. Mom said Grandma is a burden. Dad didn't say anything. The most recent was dated yesterday. Mom said tomorrow is the day. Dad said he would do it. Mom said don't back down this time." My granddaughter, at 10 years old, had started keeping a journal of the things her parents said about me when they thought no one was listening. She had kept it for 2.5 years. She had brought it to my best friend's kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon in November, and she had handed it to me because she had understood at 10 and at 11 and at 12 that something was being done to her grandmother that would eventually need to be testified to, and that 12-year-olds could testify, and that someone needed to have written the story down. Sophie. Grandma. I am going to give this to a lawyer. A very good lawyer. His name is David. He is going to read it and he is going to cry a little and then he is going to use it to get you out of that house. Is that all right with you? Yes, Grandma. Sophie. You are a remarkable child. I am not a child, Grandma. No, sweetheart. You are not. The weeks that followed were slow and strange and in their own quiet way, the best weeks I had known since Harold died. Sophie went back to her parents' house on Thursday night because David Oren told me that was what we had to do legally, to avoid a claim of parental kidnapping. She went back with her notebook in her backpack, which she had Xeroxed at Louise's before she left, and with a prepaid phone I had bought her at the pharmacy, which she had hidden inside the liner of her backpack where no one would find it. She called me every night at 8:15 from her bathroom with the water running, and she told me what had happened in the house that day, and I wrote it all down and I added it to the file I was keeping for David. Ethan and Brianna, who at first had responded to my departure with a kind of performative public concern, directed at Sophie's school and at my sister in Ohio and at the few neighbors who asked, shifted into a quieter and uglier mode when they realized, through Preston Calloway, that I had retained counsel and was not available for direct contact. Brianna stopped asking Sophie about me. Ethan stopped coming home for dinner. Sophie reported that they argued at night in a way they had not argued before, with doors closed and voices low and the particular tension of people who had made a large miscalculation and were trying to decide whose fault it was. David Oren filed his papers on Monday morning as promised. The life insurance policy was canceled by the issuing company within 48 hours, pending investigation. The guardianship draft, which had never been filed, became Exhibit A in a motion that David submitted to the family court. The deed challenge was filed separately in civil court, on grounds of undue influence exerted on a recently widowed woman. The emergency custody petition for Sophie was filed that Thursday, and a hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I wrote my statement. I wrote it at Louise's kitchen table over the course of 5 evenings. It was 23 pages long. I did not dramatize. I did not editorialize. I wrote what Brianna had said at the sink on the morning of my 66th birthday, and what Ethan had said at the dinner table the night I asked if I might go to my nephew's graduation, and they had told me they did not have room in the car. I wrote about the day Brianna had thrown out the flowers I had cut from the garden for the dining room because, as she had explained, they were attracting bees. I wrote about the look on my son's face the first time he called me confused in front of another adult, which had been a neighbor, which had been 2 years ago, which had been the moment I had begun, without fully knowing it, to prepare. David Oren read my statement and called me the next morning and said, "Margaret, this is going to do the work. Thank you." The day of the hearing came. I wore the navy blazer and the pearl earrings. Louisa drove me to the courthouse. Sophie was there with a guardian ad litem, a woman named Patrice Bello whom David had recommended and who had met with Sophie twice and had, both times, called me afterward to tell me that Sophie was one of the most composed 12-year-olds she had ever interviewed. Ethan and Brianna were there with Preston Calloway, who looked tired, because Preston Calloway had spent the 3 previous weeks trying to talk Ethan out of defending the case and Ethan had refused. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. David Oren submitted the photograph. He submitted the notebook. He submitted my statement. He submitted the canceled life insurance policy. He submitted the guardianship draft. He put Sophie on the stand for 7 minutes and asked her 4 questions, each one simpler than the last, and Sophie answered each of them in a voice that did not shake and that did not waver. The last question was, "Sophie, where would you like to live?" "With my grandmother." "Thank you." No further questions. Preston Calloway did not cross-examine her. Preston Calloway had made a decision, I learned later, that cross-examining a 12-year-old in front of this particular judge would be the single worst strategic move of his career, and he had been right. The judge granted emergency temporary custody to me that afternoon. Sophie came home with Louisa and me that night. We stopped at Ethan and Brianna's house for 45 minutes to collect her things, with a court officer present, and Brianna stood in the hallway and watched us pack, and she did not say a word, and Ethan did not come out of the study, and Sophie walked out of the house she had lived in for 12 years with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box and a small ceramic elephant she had made in 2nd grade, and she did not look back. The civil case, the deed challenge, took longer. took 7 months. It went through 2 mediation sessions and 1 full evidentiary hearing. David Oren called 3 expert witnesses, including a forensic accountant who traced the pattern of small financial benefits Ethan had extracted from me over the 6 years I had lived in his house, a pattern that added up, came to just over $90,000 in unreimbursed rent, groceries, utilities, and caregiving services I had provided. The judge in the civil case was an older woman named Constance Murray, who had read my statement, and who had read Sophie's notebook, and who had asked David Oren one question during the hearing, which was, "Counselor, what is your client asking the court to do?" "Your Honor, my client is asking the court to rescind the 2020 transfer of property on the grounds of undue influence, and to restore the deed to its original holder, with compensation to the current occupants for any documented improvements made to the property." "And what improvements have been made?" "None of any consequence, Your Honor." Judge Murray had looked across the courtroom at Ethan. She had looked at Brianna. She had looked at me. She had looked at Sophie, who was not required to attend but who had come anyway, who had sat in the second row next to Louisa, who had worn the navy dress we had bought together the week before. "I will issue my ruling within 30 days. This hearing is adjourned." She ruled in my favor 21 days later. The deed was returned to me. Ethan and Brianna were given 90 days to vacate the property. They did not appeal, because Preston Calloway had finally succeeded in explaining to Ethan what the appeal would cost and what it was likely to accomplish. I did not move back into the house. I had decided at some point during the long months of the legal proceedings that the house was not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. It was Harold's house, and it had been a good house, and it had held our life, but it had also held 6 years I did not want to live next to every day. I sold the house, and I sold it to Louisa's youngest daughter, who had been looking for a place in the neighborhood, and who I knew would take care of it the way it deserved to be taken care of. With the proceeds from the sale, and with the lottery money, which had been sitting quietly in the trust David Oren had set up for me, I bought something else. I bought a brick house with a garden, 4 streets from Louisa's, on the same street where Sophie's school was. It was smaller than the old house, and it had 3 bedrooms instead of 5, and it had a bay window in the kitchen that faced east, because I still wanted the morning light while I stood at the sink, and I had learned a long time ago from a man named Daniel Whitfield that the woman who chose which direction her kitchen sink would face was the woman who got to choose how her mornings would begin. Sophie had her own room. She had a desk by the window, and a bookshelf I built for her myself with Louisa's help, and a reading chair in the corner that had once been Harold's. On her nightstand she kept a photograph of her grandfather that I had given her, the one Ethan had not thought to pack in the canvas bag on the night he had asked me to leave his house, the one I had taken with me instead, the one that had traveled with me in the bag to Louisa's kitchen and then to a lawyer's office and then, eventually, home. Ethan was, at the time I am telling this story, still in touch with Sophie, on a supervised visitation schedule of 1 weekend a month, which Sophie attended with varying degrees of willingness. Brianna had moved out of the family home before the 90-day deadline. She and Ethan were separated, though not yet divorced. Ethan had been let go from his job at the insurance firm, for reasons related to the civil case that had become public within the firm, and he had taken a position at a smaller company 2 towns over. He had written me a letter 6 months after Sophie came to live with me, a long letter, which had arrived in my mailbox in a plain white envelope. I had read it once. It was, in parts, an apology. It was, in other parts, an explanation which was less useful to me. I had put the letter in a drawer. I had not yet decided whether I was going to answer it. Some answers take longer than others. Sophie, now 13, was thriving in a way that made Louisa cry at least once a week, usually at unexpected moments, like when Sophie laughed at something on the television or when she came home from school and told us about her day at the dinner table without being asked. She had friends. She was on the debate team. She had announced, the previous Sunday, that she was considering becoming a lawyer when she grew up, and when I had asked her why, she had said, "Because I want to be the person someone calls when they don't have anyone else." I had not answered right away. I had looked at her, across the dining room table in the house I had chosen, in the chair she had picked out at the furniture store, under the light of a lamp Harold and I had bought in 1981, and that I had somehow kept through all the moves of a long life. I had thought about David Oren, and about the phone call I had not wanted to make but had made anyway, and about the moment in Louisa's kitchen when a lawyer had said to me, "I am going to handle this case personally." Sophie, I think that is a very good reason. Grandma. Yes. I'm glad you called him. Me too, sweetheart. Louisa came over for dinner every Tuesday. She brought a pie usually. Rodney the cat, who had at first refused to acknowledge the existence of my new house, had eventually deigned to spend occasional afternoons in the sun patch on the dining room rug, and had developed, despite his long history of misanthropy, a grudging affection for Sophie, whom he permitted to scratch the base of his tail under specific and unpredictable circumstances. I went to Harold's grave on the first Sunday of every month. I told him what had happened. I told him about the house and about Sophie and about the lawyer, and about the day I had won the lottery 19 days before our son had handed me a canvas bag. I told him that the canvas bag was now hanging on a hook in the garage because I had kept it because I had decided some things you keep so that you remember the weight of them. I told him the story from the beginning each month, with a small new detail I had remembered or noticed, because Harold had been the audience of my life for 41 years and I did not intend to let death take him from that role. I stood there in the cold or the warmth depending on the month and I talked to my husband, and I left a small bunch of flowers from the garden of my new house, and I walked back to the car where Louisa was usually waiting because Louisa had started coming with me after the first couple of months, because Louisa understood that grief does not stop being grief when it is also triumph. The $43 million after taxes and the trust structures David Orrin had set up came to just under $21 million. I did not spend it. I barely touched it. The house was paid for out of the sale proceeds from the old house. My living expenses were modest. Sophie's school was the public school 4 streets away, where she had been going anyway. The money sat in the trust and it would sit there, and eventually it would go to Sophie, and it would go to a scholarship fund David Orrin was helping me establish in Harold's name at the small college where he had taken his accounting degree, and it would go to a handful of other causes I had decided on slowly over the course of the first year, including a legal aid fund for elderly women who needed lawyers and could not afford them. I did not become a woman who spent money. I had never been that woman, and the lottery had not made me into her. What the lottery had done was something else. It had given me the ability to say no. It had given me the ability to walk out of my son's house in the middle of the night with a canvas bag, and to know the whole time I was walking that I had somewhere to go. That, more than anything else, was what money had bought me. Not luxury. Not revenge. The ability to say no and to mean it. On the morning of my 69th birthday, which was 1 year and 11 months after the night of the canvas bag, Sophie came into the kitchen with an envelope in her hand. She was 14 now, tall for her age, with the same clear small-chinned look she had had at 12. She put the envelope in front of me at the table where I was drinking my coffee. "What is this, Sophie?" "Open it." Inside the envelope was a card. On the front of the card was a photograph Sophie had taken of me, the previous summer, in the garden behind the new house, among the tomatoes I had planted the year we moved in. I had not known she was taking the picture. In the photograph I was laughing at something. I could not remember what. Inside the card she had written in her round careful handwriting, "Grandma, thank you for the last 2 years. Thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for being the kind of grandmother who keeps going. I love you. Sophie." I read the card twice. I looked at my granddaughter who had set the table for breakfast without being asked, who had made the coffee, who had put a small vase of flowers in the center of the table, who was 14 years old and had already lived through more than most people live through in a lifetime, and who was still somehow at the end of all of it a person who could write a card like that. "Sophie." "Yes, Grandma. Come here, sweetheart." She came around the table and I put my arms around her, and I held her for a long moment in the kitchen of a house I had chosen, in a life I had chosen, on the morning of a birthday I had almost not lived to have in the way I was now living it. "Sophie, I love you very much." "I know, Grandma." "Sophie, I want you to remember something." "Okay." The woman they underestimate is the woman who is always holding everything together. And when she finally lets go, it is because she is ready, and because she has found the people who will help her, and because she has decided finally that she does not need to be seen by the ones who refuse to see her. "Grandma, that's a long sentence." "I know, sweetheart, but I've had a long time to think about it." She laughed. I laughed. The light came through the bay window in the east-facing kitchen. The coffee was good. The day was beginning. And I sat in my own kitchen in my own house across the table from my granddaughter in the life I had chosen, And I thought about a man in a suit in a different story in a different kitchen in a different country, who had once said to a different woman that the person who leaves you stranded in an airport is going to regret it. I thought about how true that had turned out to be, not only in that woman's story but in mine and in so many others. I thought about the canvas bag hanging on its hook in the garage, and the way my son had filled it with the things he thought I would need in the life he had planned for me. I thought about the life I had built instead, with the things he had not thought to pack, with the things I had chosen for myself, with the friend who had opened her door at midnight and the lawyer who had loved my husband and the granddaughter who had kept a notebook at 10 years old. And I thought about Harold, and I thought about the morning light, and I thought about the long, slow, patient waiting that had ended at last, in a kitchen with flowers on the table on the morning of my 69th birthday. I had not needed to shout. I had not needed to explain. I had not needed to beg. I had waited and I had watched, and when the moment came I had moved quietly, and the quiet had been enough, because the quiet had been full of everything I had been preparing for 6 years without anyone noticing, including, for a long time, me. Sophie poured me more coffee. Louisa was coming over at noon. We were going to have cake. There was a new client Patrice Bello had asked me to meet with next week, another elderly woman in a similar situation, who needed to know that someone had been through it and come out on the other side. I had agreed to meet with her. I had been agreeing to meet with several such women over the past year, quietly, on David Oren's recommendation. It was the closest I had come to a second career. It suited me. I looked at the card on the table. I looked at my granddaughter. I looked at the morning light. I was 69 years old. I was the matriarch of a family of 2. I was the owner of a small brick house on a quiet street. I was the holder of a trust that bore my husband's name. I was the woman my son had tried to throw away with a canvas bag on a November night, and I was the woman who had walked out of that house and into the rest of her life, and I was the woman who 2 years later had finally stopped waiting for anything at all. I was home. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here.